Hi, and welcome to this week's episode, which is the almost Christmas special of the Atomic Fridge. This week, you're joined by your hosts, me, Andrew Connell.
Me, Toby Borman.
And me, Joseph Scott.
And we're joined by our special guest,
Aneta Stefanovska.
So, this week, we have been joined by someone from the physics department, and I'm going to hand over to Toby now to ask some questions.
So thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to start off with a question.
Thank you for inviting me first. Yes, I must admit that it's a great idea. And I feel enchanted by being here with this surrounded with these nice people.
Thank you very much.
Enthusiastic. Yes.
Thank you. So I'll start off. We do some sort of research before we have our guests on, and in your staff directory, it says that your work is motivated by the question, what are the physical principles underlying living systems? What caused you to ask this question initially?
Well, if we go very early of my life, I must admit I started asking this question quite early. The first time I remember was when I was 9, wishing to understand living systems. And this obviously took me to my present career path. And more I was working, more I was finding out that there are no existing physical principles that can easily describe living systems. So the question only became more and more pronounced and more obviously interested and still challenging.
Thank you. So what does the study of biological processes in biological systems entail in relation to other areas of physics, and how do the different areas overlap with each other?
So why this question then is obviously still open and challenging?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a very big difference between living systems and other more physical systems, and this is that living systems are thermodynamically open systems.
Right.
So in physics, most of the work is done by isolating systems, studying causes and consequences in very controlled environment.
Right.
While in living systems, it's very difficult, although of course in biology there are lots of experiments where isolation is at least attempted, but in reality living systems exist because of their properties of being thermodynamically open.
Mm-hmm.
So there are of course other systems, not only living systems, that are thermodynamically open, and there is a whole area of physics far from thermodynamic equilibrium. But I think the most pronounced case for this area are definitely living systems.
Right. Sorry, Jeremy.
So did you come into this field more from starting at physics and moving into questions about living systems, or starting with more biology, living systems, and asking about the underlying processes?
Well, possibly I would say I have been working all my life, having in mind what Niels Bohr has said, and this is nothing exists until measured. So I have been measuring functions of living systems all my life, from the beginning of my research career. And this even more brings you to this question, because when you are measuring, then you have data that are resulting from measurements, and then you need to explain them. Mm-hmm. And in order, you see, this is an area called inverse system approach to dynamics, and it's similar to if I was giving you some musical piece, mm-hmm. and asking you to write me notes about it.
Okay.
And this, of course, is not so easy and trivial. Those who are musically talented possibly can pick up, but in physics we need models and laws, and then we need to link the measurements to our models and laws. But if there are not sufficient models and laws, then your data are always not sufficiently explained. So that's why the question of how to find out principles is still a very intensively open and being studied.
And earlier you mentioned open thermodynamic systems. Is that, if I'm interpreting this correctly, the ability to sort of interact with its environment?
Yes, and exchange energy and matter with the environment.
Right, okay. And in our sort of everyday, day-to-day life, would we find a thermodynamically closed system, or is that quite hard?
Possibly,
or possibly impossible?
Possibly the best thermodynamically isolated systems are the ones in laboratory.
Right. Yeah. So in day-to-day life, we wouldn't really encounter a biological sort of thing.
Isolated system, difficult.
No.
Difficult to imagine. Maybe if I think long enough, maybe I can say in approximation this can be considered as isolated system. But
right.
in reality, most of living systems would be thermodynamically open.
Okay.
Even if you went out to a level of molecule or beyond.
Yeah.
Then, of course, if you went down to the level of molecule and beyond, then you ask a question: what's life there?
Yeah. So in your profile, you mentioned that you research. I'm going to make sure I say this correctly. Chronotaxic systems.
Yes.
Have I got that right?
Yes. Very good.
So, could you explain what a chronotaxic system is?
Okay. So, in searching some kind of a framework for thermodynamically open systems, as we discussed, right? And this framework is in terms of physics and mathematics.
Right.
We came to formulation of chronotaxic systems.
Right.
First, chronotaxic means, well, because all of these fancy names come from either Latin or Greek, we decided to have a Greek origin of our kind of umbrella area. And chronos is time, and taxis is order. So chronotaxic systems are systems that can order their times.
Right.
In simple explanation. So they're able to change their frequencies in kind of state and maintain their stability at the same time as they are changing. That's very important. So these are systems in mathematical sense that are explained within the theory of non-autonomous systems, because non-autonomous formalism is what you need to describe thermodynamically open systems. So this spans over mathematics and physics, but deals mainly with living systems, although I must tell you that we are now involved in a very nice experiment that was done in Riken in Japan on electrons on the surface of liquid helium that seem to be behaving in microwaves, behaving in a chronotaxic way. So we are very, very excited by possibility to have a reproducible experimental model of our chronotoxicity.
Sorry, I thought you were about to ask something, Joe.
Oh no, I was just going to say. So, could you give us an example of perhaps a very, very specific example from your own research of a chronotaxic system that you've?
I must admit that I have been studying biological oscillations now. They are consequence of thermodynamical openness. You can call them fluctuations or oscillations. Most of the time when things are synchronized, they manifest as oscillations. So I have been studying biological oscillations at all levels of complexity, from cellular level to cardiovascular system to the brain. But most of my work to date probably was focused on cardiorespiratory interactions. So your heart is beating in a rhythmical way, so one can assume it as being oscillator. You are breathing in a rhythmical way. The respiration is another oscillator, and they interact. They interact because the amount of blood the heart expels in every cycle has to match how much oxygen was brought from the lungs. So they interact, and this interaction is very often chronotoxic-like. This means that they interact in a stable way. This is a manifestation of chronotoxicity. Interaction that is stable leads to synchronization. So cardiorespiratory oscillations synchronize most of the time. Actually, when they don't synchronize, this might be taken as a signature of disease. Various diseases, or for example, aging would change this.
Okay.
Exercise would change this, and so on and so on. So this is one example. But the other example at a cellular level, for example, is again, what makes the cell thermodynamically open? Ability to produce its own energy, ability to generate ATP.
Yeah.
And this is done by two oscillatory processes that interact with each other. One branch of this oscillatory process is glycolysis that functions because of glucose being brought into the cell from outside, so the system is open. And the other branch is mitochondrial production of ATP, where oxygen brought again from the outside, from the cardiovascular system, is being used to generate ATP via oxidative phosphorylation. So these two branches interact and can become chronotoxic. And again, if they are not chronotoxic, or the level of chronotoxicity may indicate the healthiness or unhealthiness of the cell. For example, even cancer can be treated in this way, or diabetes can be considered in this way. So there are many living systems examples where chronotoxicity plays a role and can be indicator of the functioning of the goodness of the functioning of this particular system.
So as the co-founder of the non-linear biomedical physics group here at Lancaster, you may have already have answered this question, but could you give an example of some of the research that you perform and the sort of impacts this has, this research has?
If I am to describe what is non-linear biomedical physics group at Lancaster, I would say, yeah, it's a bunch of nice people. So far, since I came, I think we have been having about 25 or plus PhD students working with us.
Right.
Currently still 8 or maybe 9 to complete out of these 25, 6. We have been working in 4 different areas, overlapping in order to address the question, what are the underlying principles of life, always, right? So because what I said before, we always try to do measurements, either by ourselves or some of the groups that are specialized in the question that we are discussing. So we have been involved in recordings of, for example, as I mentioned before, the electric activity of the heart, the respiration, using lasers. We can measure microvascular blood flow based on Doppler principles. Because the brain activity is electric by nature, we can pick up the electric signals from the brain, and also the cell functioning is electric, so we can pick up electric activity of the cell. It's called electrophysiological measurements. So we do measurements ourselves or our colleagues, biologists or clinicians. Then once we have data, we need methods to analyze them. But as I mentioned before, because most of the knowledge generated so far is based on assumption, at least if not about isolated systems. Of course, we have statistical physics, which deals with complex systems and systems far from equilibrium. But still, there are not available sufficiently appropriate methods for extracting information from data. So some of the PhD students will be contributing various time series analysis methods.
Right.
Like, for example, one of them, Dima Yatsenko, proposed so-called nonlinear mode decomposition, a method to decompose modes that are nonlinear, because, of course, openness is immediately nonlinear. So this is the second area. The third area is principles of physical principles of functioning, mainly for thermodynamically open systems, but again, focusing on biological systems. And we do lots of applications. So we are just about to publish a multi-author book on anesthesia, nonlinear dynamics on anesthesia. So it's not anesthesia as a clinical, but how to follow anesthesia in kind of physics terms, quantitatively throughout. Or one of the PhD students that is still to have her viva completed her work on brain dynamics that distinguishes between autistic and non-autistic brains. Then we have studies of melanoma with the laser Doppler flowmetry and our methods to analyze data. We can distinguish between melanoma, skin or non-melanoma, which is, you asked about impact, one of the potential pathway towards impact, because we also got the patent approved on this issue. We are working right now on dementia by measuring electric signals in the brain, but also oxygenation of the brain, because our hypothesis, thinking about open systems, right, is, oh no, the cells, the neurons are not dying by themselves. They are probably dying because they are not fed enough. So let's see the interaction between the cardiovascular system and the neuronal activity to be able to diagnose or sufficiently even early diagnose signatures of dementia and possibly help prevent complications. We were involved in studies of heart failure, diabetes, hypertension, hypoxia, intracranial pressure of people in coma, because there are all sorts of problems. Obviously, if they're in coma, this means they're endangered, their lives are endangered. But there is a very big problem there, because the volume of the liquid in the brain defines whether they will survive or not. Now, because they get infusion, because they cannot eat themselves, the volume may become too big, because they themselves cannot control the volume. So all this, again, manifests in a dynamic way, and with our measurements, we can pick it up and maybe inform clinicians how to follow up this kind of situation. And even malaria, for example. One of my PhD students, Yunus, went this summer to Nigeria to measure people with malaria, because in malaria, red blood cells change because of the virus, and they get stuck on the vessel wall. So we have changed blood flow or flow. The particles that are flowing are changed, and the walls through which they flow are changed. And this then manifests in dynamics that we pick up from the recordings. And not lastly, inspired by cardiorespiratory interactions, one of my ex-PhD student, Tomislav Stankovsky, proposed a method for secure communication, because you can code so securely based on the algorithms of cardiorespiratory interaction that this can be hardly broken.
Wow,
that's quite interesting, because I think when a lot of people think of physics, the applications of research in physics, most people will tend to just jump straight to engineering. But it seems like what you do has just everywhere.
Also, from what you just said and from what we've already read about, it's such a wide and varied field within itself. So it does show that physics and maths and all these areas can go way beyond initially what people might just assume they're for, where mostly it's engineering.
I think it's quite interesting that what you've been saying is your research has quite. A lot of people tend to separate physics, chemistry, biology, maths into their own little discrete units, but your research seems to just go nope with that and just kind of mesh them all together.
Yes, because I'm problem-driven, and I believe that physics must underlie every question. So you start with fundamentals. I'm sorry, mathematicians.
There's in a slight bit of pain over here from the.
But the elegance of description then comes from maths.
I do completely agree with you. Actually, I do think that in this day and age, especially now, we've had hundreds of years actually of keeping them separate and learning a lot. We've reached a point now where we do kind of need to start to meld more different areas of science together to actually find answers to innovate.
I suppose, yes, if we really want to answer questions, we have to know physics, and we have to work with, one of my postdocs is mathematician, for example. We have to work, and also we work with biologists, we work with clinicians. We have to work, but we must establish bridges. Today, when the information is so easy to retrieve, I think boundaries are really not the way to go.
So, on that, do you think, say, in the education system where sciences are often very separate, kept separately, they're taught separately, everything about them is separate, do you think that it might be useful to perhaps
I personally
have
believe
good
that we have to be good at what we are first, and then maybe go beyond. It's good to motivate people, to tell them, right, you are in physics, you like physics, but your physics can be applied to this or this or this. But yet we have first to have fundamental knowledge and then go to...
So, from your point of view, it's much better to get that initial grounding in one area and completely have a handle on that and then move on to understand other parts.
Yes, that's my understanding of how things are. But indeed, the interdisciplinarity is growing enormously. For example, I have been recently involved in various review processes. There is no proposal that is single discipline anymore.
It does actually bring us on quite well to, especially Joe, who's a natural scientist here, because Joe is mixed. Joe does maths and physics, and last year also did chemistry.
I did some chemistry.
So Joe has done a bit of every science. So possibly you might be able to talk more about interdisciplinary. The fact that did you feel you benefited from that?
Definitely. In a university sense, I think it's a little... When you're learning, I think it's a little bit different. Because I definitely benefited from the different ways of thinking that each separate science kind of cultivated. But also, when you're just learning it, you can feel very... like you're not learning enough about one thing. So for example, I was doing... With mathematics, I could only do one of the two series of mathematics. And so a lot of like you two, for example, also did the 110 series of mathematics, and I felt like I was missing out quite a bit on that, and I didn't understand it as well as I would have if I had that. But I did have the chemistry, so I was able to think about physics, especially in different ways, because physics kind of fitted in the middle between them. So doing both did improve my physics.
It's a good job you later are going into physics then, isn't it? Chosen the right path there. So actually, from some of what you've said, it brings us on quite nicely to our next question, actually, because you've talked about boundaries in a respect, and I could imagine that in some circumstances, because you go across so many departments, this could cause issues in communication sometimes, so you could lose information and it could be quite difficult. Do you think there are many issues in your field of research at the moment? Do you think your field faces issues that those not involved in this nonlinear biomedical group might not see?
Very probably it has certainly it has specific characteristics. Interdisciplinarity is kind of minority issue, right? You have benefits of being unique, but you have also difficulties because of being unique. It just, it just depends what you really want. But certainly there are problems because you sometimes may not feel you belong to somewhere. And in younger age this was important, now it's not. Then you belong more internationally to various groups that are working in similar fields. So yes and no, I would say. I mean, if you want to collaborate with people, you approach them. If the problems are exciting, there are no boundaries. If time is available, then there are no boundaries. The next to time is money, and if you manage to get them, that's the way to do things.
We have a lot of people come on the show, and when we ask that sort of question to them, quite often an aspect of that is they say there's a problem with funding and about how you get funding. But from what you've said, given that you have such a broad range of impacts of your research, is funding more difficult to get because it's interdisciplinary, or less difficult because you have this broad range of impacts and benefits that you can point at and go, it'll do this, it'll do this, it'll do this?
Possibly we have quite a lot of funding opportunities. I would say possibly more than if you were very specialized. If you were specialized, of course, there will be specialized funding opportunity. But then to be good in interdisciplinary area, you have to cover quite substantially whatever you cover. So maybe then to get a good proposal is possibly a little bit more difficult. Again, because you need to cover broader area. My experience is if I have time to write proposals, then somehow it's still there is still sufficient funding available for our field of research.
That's good, I think. Yes, we're going to say, well, in your research, you probably have quite a lot of collaboration with various other scientists who might put themselves in different fields, who might state like, I am a biologist or I am a chemist or something. When we're at university, the physics students, they tend to have this sort of friendly rivalry with absolutely everybody else.
Imaginary hierarchy.
This imaginary hierarchy where the physics students tend to place themselves at the top and every other subject far below them. Do you see this? Do you see this sort of mirrored in at your level of research, or is it gone completely?
Oh, well, maybe you're young and you are sensitive to this kind of things.
Actually, I probably should note that it is very much done in a joking and jestful sense.
Yeah, it is
no
a
student genuinely believes the just due to subject they are.
I don't think any student genuinely believes that their subject is better than every other subject just by virtue of it being their subject.
It might be also my character a bit here. I must admit that I never liked competing very much. You know, I always think I compete with myself, and my kind of day is to make better things, not to say I'm better than somebody. But I'm better because I've learned more, or I've done more, or I've understood better. So maybe this is my character that I cannot see how. But on an individual basis, you can joke at everything and every level. I'm sure you can joke about physicists being special and mathematician being a little bit out of the world or something.
No, I'm starting to dislike this week's show more and more. No, genuinely, I do think it is good to have some sense of ability to joke and point a finger and laugh at your own subject a little bit, because otherwise it can get a bit too serious. I do think it's...
No, but don't misunderstand me. Out of the world is the abstraction that is needed for excellent mathematics. It was meant as positive, not negative at all.
Oh, it was a compliment.
Absolutely.
Well,
really, because the elegance of mathematical description can be done by being a little bit a step in front of what you are
Well,
describing.
I'm going to say thank you very much. Actually, that is very nice. I'm going to probably just move on to. I'm just in the time, so I'm going to move on slightly to another topic we have. So obviously, you now work here at Lancaster University, but we're going to move back in time and talk about when you yourself were an undergraduate and postgraduate. And we're just wondering, what did you do for your PhD?
First of all, I did my PhD in Ljubljana, which is Slovenia.
Mhm.
I'm not sure whether you know where it is.
We know where I know where Slovenia is.
So
Ljubljana
Ljubljana
is the capital.
is about 150 kilometers east from Venice,
Okay.
Right.
and about 200-300 kilometers south of Vienna
Right.
All right.
in the Alps. So there I did my PhD, but it was also partially in Stuttgart in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So my PhD was on biological side, biocybernetics side at that time, and theoretical physics in Stuttgart.
Okay.
So quite a mix there, actually.
Very big mix, yeah.
So
Yes, because the question was already then how best to understand biological systems in theoretical physics
Yeah.
sense, but based on real world data, on real world examples.
So, we obviously now know quite a lot about yourself as a physicist, as a biologist, and we've learned a lot about you in your own field. But we're just wondering, what do you like to do outside of this field? Do you have any interests or hobbies outside of
I
your
used
research?
to have lots. And recently I have time for hiking in Lake District. Every Sunday is must to be in Lake District. Otherwise, I like gardening. I like listening to classical music.
Which the listeners will find out a little bit more about later on in the show.
Well, I do cross-country skiing when I can. I do swimming in the sea when I can. I have done lots of various exercises. Right now I'm enchanted by Tai Chi
All right.
because it's very nice exercise for my age.
21, yeah?
About
Yeah, just...
about 2 or 3 times 21.
So, thank you very much for sharing that, by the way, because obviously it's nice to get an insight into researchers and postdocs in a bit of a different light. I'm going to now just hand back to Joe to change the topic slightly and add an air of silliness to this almost Christmas special.
Well, as we all know, it is almost Christmas, and therefore it is the almost Christmas special, because it is not Christmas yet. It's just almost Christmas, and so we need to talk about almost Christmassy things. And the most almost Christmassy thing that we can think of when considering biological systems got to be reindeer. It's got to be reindeer, and we're gonna ask this question. We're gonna ask this question just for the children who might have considered how does Santa get around the world so fast? And obviously it's because there's reindeer pulling the sleigh, and reindeer must be pretty fast. But why are reindeer? Why can reindeer fly this fast when elk can't?
What about stags?
Stag, yeah. Various types of deer can't fly anywhere near as quickly as reindeer, apparently.
I suppose they must have a special driving force
Special driving force.
that takes them around and bring them to every subject, every home. Is it so? How many? I was just thinking, do you expect one set of reindeer and one Santa to come everywhere, or do we have parallels Santas
Multiple
coming to
Santas.
each?
We can't tell you because unfortunately we signed an agreement
Sunday
beforehand with
non-disclosure.
Santa that we would not disclose this information.
Yeah.
It's a non-disclosure act.
Santa has a really good legal team.
So I'm really not sure, but I suppose the only answer, the reasonable answer, is that they must have driving force, wishing to bring presents to everyone.
which is powered by hopes and dreams of children getting gifts. So Keep wishing, guys. Keep wishing.
Uh,
Keep that magic alive.
So in the films where if you don't believe in Father Christmas, you don't get anything. Obviously, that makes sense now, because if you don't believe in Father Christmas, you aren't essentially providing him with the power to get to you. So how can he bring you presents?
Basically, you are Santa's cheap energy source.
What we were going to say is, I was thinking about this on the bus, and I was on the bus, and I was just thinking, how could Santa get round every single house? It's like he must be flying pretty fast. And recently, we've done a module in relativity. So, applying my incredibly limited understanding of special relativity, I thought, if Santa, the sleigh, and the reindeer, there was some process, internal process, through which they could essentially reduce their mass to zero and turn it completely into kinetic energy, then they must fly at the speed of light. And so if they could use that increasing and decreasing mass as kind of a gauge to increase and decrease their kinetic energy, so they came to the stop. So they came to a stop and should return to that mass. And they could fly around the Earth, travel at the speed of light, time wouldn't be as much of an issue. But then I thought, well, if they're doing that, if it's this internal system, that can't be 100% efficient. So they must be losing energy when they accelerate and decelerate. So they must be losing mass. So firstly, the reindeer must glow. So it's not Rudolph the Red Nosed Reindeer, it's just Rudolph the glowing reindeer.
But the redshift reindeer.
Rudolph the
redshift reindeer.
But also Santa must be losing mass, because he's losing this energy that's converted completely to mass when they stop. So maybe that's how he gets down chimneys.
Maybe.
What do you think of that incredibly flawed hypothesis?
But losing mass in biological systems.
As you can see, Joe doesn't have much time. Joe's physics is slightly flawed, so I do apologise. I do apologise to the audience members listening, but we're going to go with it anyway, because this show is all about
terrible,
that kind of thing. Yep,
the good science that can disprove terrible science, because it tends to be quite interesting. So there is, can you think of an example perhaps in a biological system in which mass is converted? So we know, say in the sun, it is nuclear fusion. And you have a loss of mass results in this release of energy. Is there an example in any biological system where a similar event occurs?
Oh, mass is continuously converted into energy in biology, that's for sure. I mean, the ATP production is just some molecules turned into something that is used for energy. But to make it sufficiently fast as you would like it, I cannot immediately think how this can happen. And definitely in biology, everything is really as much as you supply, as much as you will get. So, as I said, I'm sorry I cannot help you with your imagination. All I can say is must be some kind of strong driving force that cannot be explained easily.
So perhaps this requires some more research from the non-linear biomedical physics group.
This could possibly be the Christmas research project.
Might be. Yeah.
So a lot of people will have instantly gone that converting mass to energy in a biological system sounds ridiculous, but as you've just said, in a much less extreme sense. It does happen all the time, and it's essentially what's powering us.
Almost for sure, yes. Yeah. Yes. But to limit it to your imaginative case where things change in no time, well, I'm not sure if I have any good idea that is reasonable.
This is another reason to follow the Facebook page, because if in future we have any good ideas, we will post them. Shameless plug. So Joe, I'm going to have back to Joe. Sorry, guys.
I was going to say. So we need more research on Santa. But we don't have a current theory of Santa yet.
No,
that's very quite sad, really.
But should we have one? Should we not leave this as it is, just as a nice
I personally think that Santa should not be above the laws of physics. He should need to explain himself.
Yes, I think we should leave it where it is and just have it for nice moments without bothering ourselves too much about the background.
Well, we did have more questions about Santa.
We have more questions about Santa. Well, this driving force applied to the reindeer. So, how would you? So if there were these little children listening around who are currently feeling quite disheartened, they're like, oh, what if Santa isn't real? Which he is, by the way. He is real.
How do you know this? Sorry.
We know this because we had to have a conversation with Santa's legal team. We said, all right, this is what you are allowed to talk about, and this is what you're not allowed to talk about. We are under threat of being sued by Santa.
Unfortunately, we did stumble upon Santa's magic, and therefore, if we ever reveal the secret, we may never be seen again.
We'll be put on the naughty list for sure.
Okay, so there are some things that I don't know, and I'm sorry, then I cannot discuss much because that's the basic.
Do you think that brings us on to quite an interesting point when it comes to the public's perception of science? Is that I think in general the public perceives scientists as being, in a sense, all-knowing, but it's really not like that in reality, is it? There's lots that we don't know.
I think scientists are people that know sufficiently to find out how little we know.
Yeah.
But you have to know sufficiently to know
sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Andrew.
There's paper going on. I don't quite know what it is. Oh, it's background things.
Sorry, Joe. Someone actually on the show has to run the equipment and sort things out. So I'm sorry for writing things down. I apologise to all the viewers and everyone. Sorry.
I expect a written apology to be put on our Facebook page, and in order to, so everyone who was offended by this, please go to our Facebook page to see Andrew's written apology.
Now you have an interesting question about Santa and global warming, don't you, Joe?
Well, just thinking if Santa's applying, if Santa were applying some sort of driving force to the reindeer.
Okay.
So there must be this this force. He must be applying some sort of putting some energy into the reindeer. And where would Santa get this energy? Of course, from the national grid. So is Santa a chief part of the demand for energy? And as such, is Santa one of the leading causes of global warming?
Oh, I thought this global warming can be explained in a different way. If we assume that there are n Santas which are same as the number, because I don't think we can assume that one Santa can really go to each of us, right? So it's better to assume that there are n Santas for each one, so that everyone can be happy. And if they are supposed to be coming fast, they are flying with no time. And because of their movement through the atmosphere, they may be hitting the atmosphere and maybe contributing to the global warming.
So, Santa, you have a lot to answer for here. You have a lot to answer for.
on that very cheery Christmas note, we're starting to wind down on the show now, so I'm going to have a quite cheery Christmas note. I'm going to pass it back to Andrew because I believe you've picked a Christmas song for us.
Yes. So, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. And I'd like to say thank you to our special guest, Aneta.
Very well. Well done.
The first time I've got that right all day.
He was practicing quite a lot before the show.
So thank you very much, and so we wish you all, everyone listening, and everyone obviously that's going to listen later on, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And on that note, we have a song called "Hymn of the Cherubim," which is sung, I think it's the USSR Chamber Choir.
It's Tchaikovsky's song.
It's Tchaikovsky's song. And so I'm going to just play out with that. And thank you very much for listening this week, and have a very Merry Christmas.
Thank you for inviting me, and all the best for all of you here. Thank you for questions and discussion and a nice, pleasant atmosphere here. And I wish all students lots of joy in every possible way with their studies, and Merry Christmas as well.
Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas.
you.